Hello, and welcome to this EdTech video here at Boston College Law School. I wanted to talk to you really quickly about my preferred settings that you should enable for your different meetings when you're taken out of the high security group here at BC. So real quick, just to recap what that actually means, I have several other videos that I'll link to below or accompanying this video that share the other instructions that I've sent out in regards to this issue, but I do want to recap it for you. So at Boston College, in our Zoom account, there's something called the High Security Group. And basically this was created to enforce some common sense security restrictions to make sure that your Zoom meetings here at BC were as secure as possible without, forcing you to think at all about enabling these settings. In some cases, it actually makes sense to be taken out of the group so you can have a little bit more control over your meetings. So the two main settings that it controls is that only authenticated users can join meetings, and that all non-BC users are automatically sent to the waiting room. Anybody that has a BC Zoom account instantly bypasses the waiting room as long as they're appropriately signed in, and then they can join your meeting friction-free without any issue. So that's really great for 99% of use cases here at Boston College. Some of you may have run into issues for a few special scenarios where it makes sense to be taken out of the high security group. Let's say you want to use your waiting room for office hours. Well, in order to do that, right now that setting is locked, so you can't even change it. You'd have to be taken out of the high security group. The other thing is the only authenticated users can join meetings. That particular setting causes a ton of confusion, actually, and there are resources and articles written by IT, by myself, videos that I've posted to the Remote Teaching Canvas site, all of these resources that you can use to figure out what exactly that means. But essentially, in a nutshell, it just means that you have to be logged into Zoom in order to join a meeting hosted by a BC Zoom account holder. So this can get you in hot water in a few cases. Mostly this is like departmental type meetings or community outreach where you're going to have a lot of people from outside the BC community coming in from different organizations. Maybe they're not allowed to create Zoom accounts, for instance, based on their employer's wishes or rules and regulations, something like that. So in that case, you'd have to be taken out of the high security group in order to allow them to join your meeting. And these two things reduce the friction even more for people joining your meetings, with the caveat that it does slightly increase the risk for kind of nefarious things happening, potentially like Zoom bombing, or in general, just kind of from someone wandering into your Zoom meeting that maybe had access to your link but shouldn't actually be there. Something like that could potentially happen. But this video is meant to clear up all those issues, as well as give you my basically my recommended settings that you should turn on based on a few different scenarios. So before I hop over to the Zoom account and actually show you where these settings are and how you can configure them, I just wanted to quickly go through a couple other things. And that is what I suggest to be your meeting security best practices. So there's 4 best practices, 2 for all meetings, and then 2 that depend on what type of meeting you're holding. You can change those as you see fit. So the first one would be for all meetings. I do recommend enabling a meeting passcode, and that is just a secure passcode that members have to enter when they join your meeting. If you share the meeting link with your participants, that meeting passcode is actually already embedded in the link, so there's really nothing for them to enter, which is nice. It just adds an additional layer of security, kind of worry-free for your meetings. I'll show you what that means in a minute. And then I suggest generating a random meeting ID when you create the meetings. This is the default behavior, actually, so there shouldn't be anything you have to do with this. I do know that there's the option to choose your personal meeting room for all of your meetings being scheduled, which I suggest not doing just because it increases the security risk when you choose that option. So those are 2 things for all meetings. And finally, before I hop over to the Zoom web interface to show you where these things are, I want to talk about the two case-dependent security options when you're creating meetings. So the first one would be to enable a waiting room, and the second is to only allow authenticated users to join your BC Zoom meeting here. So the first one, I suggest that again, this depends on sort of your situation and why you're asking to be taken out of the high security group. But in general, let's just say for the case of simplification right now, you would like to use Zoom for office hours. So you would turn off the waiting room for any meeting that doesn't require people to go to the waiting room. So for instance, for like your general class purposes, your just general meeting needs, you would actually disable the waiting room for all of those. And then strictly for your office hours meeting, you would turn on the waiting room. And you would enable the waiting room option to be so that anyone that joins your meeting goes to the waiting room. So that would capture BC participants, non-BC participants. Anyone and everyone that would join your meeting would go to the waiting room, and you would have to admit them from that Zoom waiting room, which is very simple to do, but that's how that would work. The other case-dependent sort of meeting scenario would be if you know you have a lot of people joining that don't have Zoom accounts or might not already have one before they join. So like prospective students, maybe you're meeting with a bunch of outside clients, for instance, if you're in a clinic or something like that. Or maybe you have a bunch of guest speakers that come in regularly to your class. Maybe their firm doesn't allow them to have Zoom. This would be a good option to uncheck when you create your meeting. So that way they don't have to sign into Zoom to join. They would just hop right into your classroom meeting and you'd be good to go. So let me hop into my Zoom account and I will show you how you turn these things on and off once you're taken out of the high security group. So the first thing I'm going to do is hop over to a new tab, and the easiest way to get to your BC Zoom account is to go to bccte.zoom.us. And you can click sign in here, and this automatically hooks into our single sign-on environment, which is how you should be signing into your Zoom account so you make sure that you are in your proper account. So when I click sign in, it's going to take me to the normal BC login page that you're familiar with. Okay, and then once you're signed into your account, you're brought to your meetings tab, and you can see a list of any upcoming meetings you've already scheduled, and all of these other things over here, your settings, stuff like that. So once you're taken out of the high security group, it is up to you to actually go in and change your meeting settings so that you can take advantage of these things. So in order to do that, first you're going to go into settings, and then the two settings that I mentioned that were locked, these are going to be in the security section, which is the very top section here in the meeting settings for now. So the first one is the waiting room, and you can choose what type of behavior you want this to have when you initially create meetings, whether it's on or off by default. And then, of course, when you're creating the meeting, you'll have the option to enable it anyway. So I'm going to leave this turned on because I think that would be the appropriate thing to do. And then under Edit Options, what I'm going to do is choose Everyone. By default, normally it's set to users not in your account, which, as I mentioned before, this allows all BC members to bypass the waiting room. So even if you would like to use this for office hours without being taken out of the high security group, anyone from BC would automatically join your meeting, so just be aware of that. So I would go ahead and set it to Everyone after being removed. Hit continue to save your changes. And since this was already set before, there's nothing to save, so I'm just going to click cancel. And you can see that everyone will go into the waiting room. So now for meetings where you'd like to use that waiting room functionality to act as a true waiting room and really be a catch-all for anyone joining your meeting, that would be the setting that you need to turn on first. The second setting that you need to disable or change based on your preferences is this only authenticated users can join meetings. And again, at this top level in your settings, this is just dictating the default behavior for when you create a meeting. So I'm going to leave this turned on for now, and I'll show you why in just a second. Again, so these kind of two settings, just make sure that they're actually both turned on, because if you forget to adjust these during creating your meeting, then at least your Zoom meetings have the most security enabled by default, which is always a good thing. Okay, so if I go back to my meetings and I would like to schedule a meeting now, I'll show you first from the web interface just how to schedule a meeting here, and then I'll open up the Zoom desktop software and show you there too, because you can do this in both of those locations. So if I click schedule a meeting, I would give it a name. So let's just say this would be an example of an office hours meeting. And I'll go through the use case for each of the different meeting types. So if I were creating a meeting for office hours after being removed from the high security group, this is the settings I would enable for my meetings. I always like creating a recurring meeting and then changing it to no fixed time. I think this is the cleanest. It's the simplest way to create meetings. It just gives you a recurring meeting link that you can use indefinitely, share with whoever you'd like, and you don't have to worry about setting dates and times and having it clog up your meetings tab with a bunch of upcoming recurring meetings and stuff like that. It just gives you one clean meeting ID to use every time, which I really like. So for the meeting ID, I would leave it to generate automatically again. For security, I would actually leave the passcode turned on. I think there's not really any reason to ever turn this off, actually. So it just adds an additional layer of security. And once you're taken out of this high security group, that's sort of like your next best level of security when you're creating these meetings, especially if you do things like turn off the waiting room and uncheck the box to not allow or allow authenticated users to join your meeting. So I want to have the waiting room turned on because this is an office hours meeting. I have the video for both host and participant turned on by default. I leave that on too. I think that makes sense. Audio, leave that as the default, which is both. And then for meeting options, I do not want people to be able to join this without me there. And mute participants on entry, that's fine. I just always leave this checked by default. So when people join my meeting, if there's a bunch of noise in the background, they have to get settled first. There's no risk of, them having their microphone turned on and interrupting something going on. And for this case, if I'm using this meeting for office hours, I am actually going to check this box to only allow authenticated users to join. Again, I'm basically only stripping away the settings that make sense for this meeting. So I'm going to turn on every single security setting that I can in order to be as safe as possible. So I turn this on, and then that's actually it for this particular meeting. So I'll go ahead and click Save. I'm not going to do that now just because I don't want to create the meeting. I'll show you what this looks like when I create a meeting in just a moment. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. I am going to go ahead and click Save just so I could show you this invite link. So I mentioned earlier that the passcode is always a good thing to turn on, and that it seamlessly gets added to the end of your meeting link. So if you send this link to somebody and they join your meeting by clicking this link, they're never going to be asked to enter the password. This little PWD equals and a bunch of gibberish at the end, this is actually the embedded passcode that's been encrypted. It's safe. No one would actually know what the actual password is, which is this number right here, which I'm going to delete this meeting after this particular tutorial, so there's no risk of me showing any of this information to you. So I just like to show this because this is a seamless process. It's very smooth. Again, it prevents people from just like randomly trying to guess meeting IDs. They also have to randomly guess your password too. So the chances of them being able to do that are slim to none. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but it just greatly increases the friction for people trying to randomly like fish meeting IDs on the web, stuff like that. And then of course you can click this copy invitation button to get all the full meeting details. So if you had someone joining by phone, for instance, they would still need the password, and you can give them that by sending them this whole meeting invitation here. Okay, so I'm going to delete this meeting and start over. So let's schedule a meeting, and instead of for office hours, let's do one for a normal class. So I always like to just make up a random fake ed tech class. And I'm going to go through how I would configure this. Again, create the topic however you would like to do that. Normally your class name makes the most sense here. And then check recurring meeting. For recurrence, select no fixed time. Again, this just saves the headache of having to scroll through a million recurring meetings. And it also makes sense because a lot of times I get asked about, well, what happens if there's an administrative Monday or there's a holiday or something like that, and I need to change like the time. This solves all those problems because, again, it just gives you a random meeting ID that you can use for the entire semester, and there are no issues about what time you join, how long you join, any of that type of stuff. All of it will just work, which is great. That's the nice thing about Zoom. Now, for meeting ID, again, generate automatically. For security, I recommend, again, leaving the password turned on, or passcode, excuse me. And then I'm going to uncheck the waiting room because I've turned on the waiting room to send everyone to the waiting room, and I don't want that for my class. I just want them to come right in. For the video, I leave the host and participant turned on. And then for the meeting options, typically what I would do, again, I uncheck enable join before host. I pretty much never turn this setting on, and I will talk about one scenario where that might make sense for you. I leave mute participants upon entry turned on, and again, I check this box. Only authenticated users can join. So the one caveat here for class purposes would be, let's say that you have a guest speaker and you really don't want to prevent them from joining your meeting seamlessly. Let's say they're not allowed to create a Zoom account, for instance. That would be the only scenario where this makes sense. Then you would leave this unchecked. And I would probably even leave it checked until you have that guest speaker coming in, and then go in and change your meeting settings at that time, and then turn it back on once that particular guest speaker has attended your meeting. So I'm going to leave that checked for now. And then that would be it in terms of security. Now, obviously, there's more options you could check depending on your needs, like if you're going to pre-assign breakout rooms or things like that. Again, I have other tutorials and videos that talk about that feature, so check those out if you're interested in those features. And then you can click Save. And then at this point, you can copy and paste this link and add it to your Canvas page. I typically instruct people to create a Zoom meeting link module and then create a page within that module and then post that information there by clicking the copy invitation and just kind of copy and pasting this whole thing. So again, I have full instructions for how to do this in other places that you can check out to learn how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to delete this particular meeting. So we've covered office hours, we've covered a normal class meeting. Let's talk a little bit about, let's say you're creating a meeting that maybe you're hosting a workshop or a recurring professional development meeting with different lawyers or law firms in the area, or whatever. It could really be anything. What I would do is click schedule a meeting, give it a name. I'm just going to say my recurring meeting. We'll just call this professional development. It doesn't really matter. The recurring meeting option, again, my favorite thing to do, no fixed time. And then scroll down. So the security settings that I would enable for this type of meeting would be to enable a passcode. I don't want to have people go to the waiting room. I don't want to have to admit everybody joining my meeting from there. And let's just say that I know I'm meeting with a bunch of outside people outside of the BC community that don't have a BC account, and I'm unsure of whether or not they're able to create a Zoom account or if they already have one. So rather than have them waste time either creating a free account on the fly, like when they're trying to join your meeting, or if they're just not able to for whatever reason, I'm going to leave this unchecked as well. Again, I do not want to enable join before host. So this is how I would set up this type of meeting. And again, this would be for, all kinds of kind of like a catch-all of meeting types. So, if you work in a department and you have departmental meetings, this could be a good option for that. If you're meeting with people outside of BC for certain things like consulting or anything like that, this would also be a good option for that. And again, this passcode option in the security settings, that's sort of like your first barrier to entry, and in most cases it's good enough. All right, so when you're done, you can click save and be good to go. I'm not going to save this one because that doesn't really matter so much. And I just want to talk about one more type of meeting that you may want to create once you're taken out of this high security group. The final type of meeting, which I actually kind of alluded to in my last description, or even used it as an example rather, but would be departmental meetings. And the reason I want to kind of highlight this and show you just one other option of how to set it up would be to allow people to join your meeting before you're there. So what I would do is, let's just say, I'm going to just call this law ATR departmental meeting. So maybe I know I'm going to join this, or maybe, this is just a meeting for all of us to kind of catch up for things coming up over the next week or two, or, different projects coming up, stuff like that. But it's going to be a recurring meeting again with no fixed time. It's just an open link out there that, we've scheduled outside of Zoom, like with Google Calendar or something like that. And it would be helpful that if, let's say I'm the owner of the meeting, if the other members of the group, if they wanted to join early and start talking before I got there, to go ahead and allow them to do that. Or in the event that I'm not there, then this open meeting ID would still work for them. I wouldn't have to join necessarily. So I'm going to leave the security setting. I'm going to continue to include the passcode for this meeting. I'm going to leave the waiting room turned off. And then the final thing that I would do would be to enable join before host. And if this is for departmental purposes, or like it's only BC community members, then I'd also check this box here to allow only authenticated users to join. And again, that's just another additional layer of security that, as often as you can turn it on, I would turn it on. And from there, I would just click save. And then you can share this meeting link, again, in any number of ways you're accustomed to sharing things. Email, Google Calendar, whatever it is. Maybe it's in a Google chat room or something like that. However you share these meetings, that would be how you go ahead and do that. So that would be creating meetings. And this is very similar. It's a very similar process if you're using the Zoom desktop app. So I'm just going to open that up real quick. Open up the Zoom app. But I have to sign in. And I'm going to sign in with SSO. You should always be signing in with SSO. I know the company domain. That is BCCTE. And then I'm just going to open Zoom back up. Okay. So once you're logged into your Zoom account, you can go ahead and schedule a new meeting here if you'd like. So if I click schedule, okay, that's fine. It's just notifying me that my settings have synced from the web, which is good. All of the same things show up here. So I can just choose a recurring meeting. It looks like my laptop might be logging me out here. Hang on one second. Okay, so I would click a recurring meeting. You give it the topic, title, whatever that is, depending on your needs. Again, security section, passcode, I pretty much always leave this turned on. You have your waiting room options here. They're going to always default to what you set in the web interface that I was showing you before. One thing I do want to highlight here is under calendar settings, it really makes sense to just always check other calendars because Zoom is going to try and open up one of these different calendar providers if you have one of these checked, and sometimes it just causes confusion and messes things up. So, or sorry, it doesn't mess things up, but it can cause confusion if you're not used to that sort of behavior. So in order to prevent all of that, I just check other calendars all the time. And then under advanced options, this is where you get to those things like enable join before host and the only authenticated users can join. So everything that I've already talked about in this video still applies there. The final thing I want to talk about is once you're in the meeting, the primary thing that you want to be aware of is that you can actually change some of these settings after the meeting has already begun. And I thought it would be helpful to show you that. So if I click on the security option here, there's a few extra security features that I just want to run through really quickly. So this lock meeting, I'll just run down the list from top to bottom. The lock meeting option will actually prevent any additional users from joining your meeting. So this will be helpful. Let's say this is more of an open style meeting and you've released a lot of the security features that I've already been talking about. Like you've turned off the waiting room. You allow anyone to join. They don't have to be signed in or authenticated to Zoom. Maybe you've even turned off the passcode for some reason. Well, I would be familiar with this setting just in case you need to prevent additional people from coming in. Maybe you've noticed that everyone that was going to join has joined. And with your meeting kind of in a more vulnerable state, once they join, you could just click that lock meeting, and then that prevents anyone else from joining. So that would be kind of security setting number one here. Let me just close that. The other thing that you can do is you can actually enable or disable the waiting room right from this security option. So if I uncheck that, I've disabled the waiting room. So now anyone else that tries to join the meeting, they will not have to be sent to the waiting room. They'll just come right in, which is kind of a cool thing to know about. The other thing that I did want to show here is that this is also where you go to allow people to share their screen. So this doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the security settings I've been talking about previously. But while I'm here in the security tab, I figured I would go ahead and talk about it. So you'll notice the one kind of feature that was missing from this is allow authenticated users to join. That setting has to be controlled before the meeting starts. So if that's going to be an issue for you, let's say you had a guest speaker or a participant that just calls and says, "Hey, I can't join. I'm being asked to sign in, but I'm not allowed to create a Zoom account." Well, you would have to end your meeting. Go ahead and end the meeting for all. And in your meeting options, you would, let's just pretend this was the meeting I was just in. So I click on my meetings tab, click on the name of the meeting, go ahead and click edit, and then scroll down to advanced options and uncheck this box. Click save. So I'm unchecking only authenticated users can join. And then I've got my meeting invitation here. It's going to be the same thing. It doesn't change the meeting ID, or if it has passcode enabled, it doesn't change that either. So you're safe to just reuse the same link. And then you can go ahead and click start the meeting, and then everybody can rejoin at that point. So if people are already in the meeting, for instance, you could say, "Hey, I'm about to shut this meeting down and reconfigure some security settings so that the speaker can join. Please, try to join back in just a moment." Maybe give them 5 minutes or something like that. And then once everybody clicks the link again, with however you previously shared it with them, then it will take those settings to allow everyone to join the meeting. So I know that was a lot. Definitely, take your time, watch this video, maybe rewatch it if you get confused or you just want to go back for informational purposes. But that's all of my recommendations for how to configure your Zoom settings once you've been taken out of that high security group. And just as a reminder, you have to do this from the web interface. So that's another thing people get confused about, is the fact that Zoom has kind of two places where they keep different settings. On the web is where they keep those options for changing how the waiting room works, and then also this only authenticated users can join meetings option, whether that's turned on by default or not for meetings. And then from there, once you start scheduling them, that's where you actually change those settings on a case-by-case basis. Always remembering to leave the most security options in place when you can, and only disabling the ones when absolutely necessary. So that's it. I know this was kind of a longer video, but I feel like the extra explanation helps sort of wrap your head around how all this stuff works together. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.